Hey everybody, it's Party Elite, and today we've got an extended look at Kislev alongside the slightest hint at additional Chaos units that we can look forward to in Total War Warhammer 3. Between the new trailer that dropped today and a handful of new screenshots, there's an opportunity to see some elements that were not shown at the first press event, and if you haven't seen my coverage of the recent event, you can check out the playlist linked in the description and pinned comment down below. You'll also find a link to my game store where you can grab the game and support the channel if you're interested. For now though, without any time to waste, let's dive in. Right off the bat, before the logos even come up, we see axe and shield wielding infantry, presumably a Tsar Guard variant, and behind them we see a unit of presumably the same, though they're carrying some heavy maces. I suspect those are armor-piercing weapons that cause splash damage and have a bit of an area of effect about them. In the background we have units that we've seen previously, so nothing new to talk about there. These guys are also new. Handguns, axes, shields. I suspect these will be another unit that claims to be capable in melee, with fire while moving and vanguard deployment. I picture them as a Free Company militia equivalent basically, though I think they'll be a bit more capable of dealing damage in melee, albeit with a lower melee defense stat, and they'll of course have By Our Blood, the Kislevite faction mechanic that buffs leadership when health is low. This will in turn allow them to stay in the fight for a bit longer if they get caught out, let's say by fast enemy harassment units or cavalry or, anything really. They'll stick around for longer, again because of that By Our Blood buff to leadership. And just as a reminder folks, as we talk about all of the units we talk about today, I think it's safe to assume that By Our Blood will be available across the board because it is, yes again, the Kislevite faction mechanic. I don't know if it's the only one, it seems like the only one, but at least we know they have that leadership buff when health drops below 50%. Streltsy squat. I imagine the higher the rank, the better their squatting form is. Cossacks with spears. Again, we've seen them already. Chaos warriors with axes. Exalted bloodletters. You can tell because of the glowing Hellblades, they're exalted as opposed to regular bloodletters. Or at least that's what differentiated them in-game. I imagine they're applying the same logic in these trailers as well. This dude. Now, this dude is interesting. He looks like he'll be another Lord type, perhaps. Might be a legendary Lord even. I don't recognize him though, so I can't put a name on him. He seems less like nobility and more like a religious cult figure type. So maybe he's like a head priest of the cult of Ursun, perhaps. A support type character with a lot of buff spells, I imagine. We know the Patriarch seems to be a hero character, so this could be a souped up version of the same. I'd love to hear your theories on this one as well, but I'm thinking it's a support-centric legendary lord that can provide healing, leadership buffs, maybe melee stat buffs, and more. But this is definitely looking like a legendary lord here. Next up, we have what I think is a saber-toothed tiger, an ice tiger, a blend of the two. Either way, whatever it is, it's looking like a single entity unit, likely causing fear. I expect they won't be as deadly as Bear and Bear Cavalry, to give everything its own kind of niche to fill, but I suspect we'll get frostbite if not more considering its general kind of icy look. I imagine they'll also maybe be a bit faster, quicker to kind of get in and get out, and be kind of a hit and run kind of an animal, I suppose. Again, this isn't just some regular animal, it seems infused with magic to a certain degree, so I expect there might also be magical damage beyond frostbite. I wouldn't be surprised if we get some variants, like a feral variant and a tame variant, whatever they decide to call it, because this one seems like it's got some kind of, I wouldn't say clothing on it, armor, decorative elements on it. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw one that didn't have those elements and came in as a weaker variant, more likely to, rampage or whatever the equivalent is in the new game of rampaging. So that's my thoughts there. Now, moving on from this seemingly magical ice tiger, let's talk about this. I think this is an Ice Maiden, or perhaps an Ice Witch. Either way, these are Lore of Ice sorceresses of different levels, and I imagine we'll see the former as heroes and the latter as lords, with Tsarina Katerin being the legendary lord that falls under this classification. I suspect this is an Ice Maiden, and you'll see why later on when we take a look at some of the screenshots that have come out. Now this looks like a regular Chaos Warrior here, as in a non-aligned Chaos Warrior. No, coordinate embellishments, I suppose. I can't quite place it. but they're different. But after this really sick upcoming sequence, we see a clear shot of another not yet seen unit. This looks like a Norsken or a wannabe champion of Khorne. Somebody who fights for Khorne, perhaps, but hasn't yet received any gifts. He's got the right colors where he's got them when it's not just bare flesh, and he's carrying around some skulls with an axe and shield combination. And you can see his counterpart a few frames later with what looks like a Khornate shield. So this looks like a, weaker, I guess, from an armor and melee defense perspective type of a unit. So we're not only seeing the full-fledged, fully armored Chaos Warriors of Khorne and whichever other god, but we're also seeing the lower tier, perhaps tier 1 types. These guys might also have sort of various effects, like they might be able to berserk. They might take advantage of Khornate faction mechanics. I imagine they would if they're serving Khorne. I suspect that'll have something to do with the more kills they get, the better they'll perform. So far, all we've seen is that the Hellblade, that bloodletters and bloodletter variants and mounted bloodletters and all that kind of stuff, the Hellblade is tied into kill counts. When a certain threshold is crossed, they give some buffs. I wouldn't be surprised if there are other benefits to be gained from getting kills, especially for Khornate aligned mortals. But enough on these these two. We don't know anything about them. They could be anything. I'm just making some guesses over here, of course, based on the frames we've been given. Next up, we have some ranged chariots, or at least that's what I'll call these bear-drawn sleds gliding on their ice carpets with gunners in the back. They feel akin to war wagons, but the bears will likely add armor-piercing and maybe even anti-infantry to melee in a different way that being kind of trampled by a chariot would apply. I expect we're going to see some decent charge bonuses here as well. Not so much, because they are still supposed to be, I think, primarily ranged units. However, if you get charged down by a pair of bears, it's gonna hurt. It's gonna hurt. So I suspect these guys will do okay in melee. They'll have that armor piercing and that anti-infantry. Little Grom is also bear drawn, and we've seen that unit's stats, and Little Grom has been thoroughly discussed, and I imagine some of that will carry over as far as, melee is concerned. Though again, these guys I imagine will be a little bit faster to play up their kind of skirmishing angle, right? Whereas Little Grom is expected to stay back and fire as an artillery piece. I believe these guys are going to be moving in and out of range. They'll be firing while moving, as we're seeing them in action over here, getting a good bit of armor-piercing damage done, firing in 360 degrees based on, again, just this trailer. Mechanically, it might be different, but based on this trailer, it looks like they're able to fire in all directions while moving pretty quickly. So I suspect we'll see decent speeds, not as fast as, dedicated horse archers, but should these guys get caught out of position, or should you want to send them in after they're out of ammo, or even when they have ammo, you can send them in with a degree of confidence that they'll survive and cause a fair bit of damage. If not, well, certainly they'll cause fear, if nothing else. Now, what's interesting, and maybe it's just to me, but the bears aren't polar bears. They're brown bears, or grizzly bears, if you will. Now, I wonder if we'll see bear varieties represent different levels of, say, ferocity. Like, units with brown bears are less devastating in melee, but they're, let's say, faster, or vice versa. I'm not a bear expert, but there's differences between the different types of bears, and I imagine if we're seeing them, maybe they won't just be visual differences in game either, they'll also kind of be statistical differences. I would like to see them be different sort of classes of bears, though. That would be pretty cool, I think. I like bears, so, I'm all for that. Now, that does bring us to the end of the trailer. However, as I hinted at earlier, there is more to look at. So this first shot, right off the bat, we see Katerin in the middle of one of her coolest fight animations, and to her one side, we have that same saber-toothed tiger, ice tiger, whatever they end up calling it. We have one of those. But further to the foreground, we see what I think is the Ice Witch. So earlier we talked about the Maiden, now we're looking at, I think, the Witch. She seems a bit more regal than the caster we saw earlier, so that's why I kind of feel like, again, that was the Maiden, and this is the Witch. And while the Witch is the generic lord, again is my suspicion, the Maiden is the hero, so you can kind of organize your armies accordingly. And of course, Katerin is the legendary lord who comes from that same categorization, that same classification, if you will. To the back, though, you can see more bear cavalry, and once again, grizzly bears. and they have completely different armor and everything from the polar bear cavalry. I genuinely think we're getting different classes of bear units depending on the bear species, and okay, maybe I'm the only one. Y'all have to tell me, but I think that's pretty cool. I think that'd be pretty neat, because they do look differently armored, and they are different animals, and so it'd be neat to kind of see that represented in the roster. It's a simple, so to speak, way to get that, like I was saying earlier, visual differentiator and visual impact, while also having some stats varieties. Now here's the guy from earlier again, looking, again, eerily like a legendary lord. Maybe he's more capable in melee than I first thought, as he deals with some Chaos Warriors and Bloodletters. Now this shot, we have Polar Bear Cav that we've seen before, but behind him, we can see what looks like a Great Sword variant of the Tsar Guard. So these guys will be anti-infantry and armor-piercing, but they lack shields, so they won't be as safe when they're being shot at, whether it's, missiles or bolts or what have you, but they will have that anti-infantry armor-piercing capability. We also see familiar Khornate units here, Blood Crushers and an Exalted Bloodthirster, as you can see based on the weapon combo back there. Now, previously I'd mentioned that the Exalted Bloodthirster might be a hero rather than a lord. I think either is possible, to be honest, and maybe there's a few variants of each depending on the weapon loadout. So you've got your kind of whip and axe, you've got your double axe, you have your double-headed axe, there might be a few versions. Again, it's all speculation right now, but that would be pretty cool, and that way you have Exalted Bloodthirsters, again, whether they are heroes or they are lords, whichever way they end up going, they would be a little different. You could spec them a little differently, they'd have different focuses and skill sets. I think that'd be pretty cool, seeing them with different sets of weapons out there. Now here we actually see quite a bit. Even though we're zoomed out, there's some good information over here. The unit cards for the Great Sword Tsar Guard that we saw earlier, alongside Ice Guard with dual weapons. So we've seen the Ice Guard with glaives from the earlier press event, but these are Ice Guard with dual weapons. So that means they'll be losing their anti-large capabilities, and I suspect it'll be in exchange for better anti-infantry melee capabilities. I also suspect we'll see maybe slightly higher melee attack stats, but reduced melee defense stats, and you can see actually they still have ammunition, so they must be retaining their Frostbite ranged capabilities. They seem like a fun unit. We also see Bear Cav unit cards, Horse Archer unit cards, Bear Sled Chariots or Bear Wagons. I think I'll call them Bear Wagons. Sure, the Bear Wagon unit card. They're matching the sled back shooters that we saw in the trailer. Then we've got the Elemental Bear and Little Grom. You can see the same unit cards from this angle, and there's not much else new to see here, but I gotta say, after having the grass hyped up during my dev interview, I don't have much to go on yet. Jokes aside though, these shots look beautiful. Just some beauty shots of the battlefields, and outside of a couple of trees that stick out from time to time, I think it's looking pretty good. Now, as you look at those shots of the world though, I guess I should start wrapping up because there's not much more to say or see. It's nice to see more of the Kislevite units get teased like this, and it's looking like a very fun roster. I think the Sled Back Gunners might be my favorite unit that we've seen so far. It's unexpected, and that's a big draw for me. Like, I love Bear Cav, don't get me wrong, they're awesome, and in real life, the Bengal tiger is my favorite animal, so the Ice Tiger, or if it's a saber-tooth tiger, tigers have a place in my heart, for sure. But the bear-drawn sled chariot popping shots while skating around at full speed, I did not see that coming, and I love it. I'd love to know your favorite unit of the ones you've seen so far as well, and if there's anything you're hoping to see added on top of it. I'm sure there's still more up CA's sleeve, and I'm sure we'll see it all soon enough, but based on what we've seen so far, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And I'm also curious about thoughts on my bear theory. Is there any ground to stand on there? I mean, polar versus grizzly, how that might be reflected in stats. I feel like that's gotta be a thing, right? But anyway, folks, that's the end of the line for today's video. If you enjoyed it and want more like it, make sure you hit that like button. And if you want more Total War Warhammer 3 coverage, make sure you subscribe to the channel. There's plenty more to come in the coming months. Feel free to check out my other coverage by following the links in the description and pinned comment down below. And again, if you want to pick the game up while supporting the channel, you'll find a link for that as well in the, again, description and pinned comment down below. But for now, and as always, a massive thanks goes out to all of the channel members and patrons who've been supporting the channel on a monthly basis. Y'all keep us alive and running smoothly. And of course, a big old thanks goes out to each and every one of you for watching. Until next time, cheers.